Also, iPad. Okay, let's do this. Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. Let me see. No. Okay. Okay, I've decided I want to, this is going to hold me accountable to reading as well, because I talked about this earlier when I went on live, and I want to be more consistent. And so I was talking about this book. I think it's flipped for you, but that's okay. The Courage to, oh, and this comes off, so this is totally upside down. But it's called The Courage to Be Disliked. Hello. And there have just been some really powerful concepts in here. So I want to go over this one like section. What time is it for me? It is 7:13 p.m. And my class ended early, so here I am. I am going to pick like a very small part of this book because I think it's really powerful, and I'm constantly highlighting in this book. I haven't finished it yet. I'm in Pennsylvania right now. And so I want to go through this one topic, which is that people always choose not to change. That is the topic of like the mini section. It's not the whole chapter. It kind of is divided into parts, the book. So it is just like this like sub chapter where I want to kind of break down some of the conversation. So what I explained earlier today was that the book is like this whole conversation between this philosopher and the other person is just labeled as youth. So the whole book is like them going back and forth in dialogue about just life, just philosophy, really like different philosophical topics. And it is largely from this like psychological perspective. I'm not going to get too like heady right now, but it's from a like Adler, literally, I tried to say it. It's a type of psychology from this specific psychologist from back in the day. And so the whole book is this like youth person coming in and going back wanting to learn more from this philosopher because he's heard in the town that this philosopher like makes crazy things happen and has like an answer for everything kind of thing. So the kid is like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go like, who is this guy? Like, let me go talk to him. And so the back and forth of it, I'm 26. The back and forth of it is a really helpful way, I think, in a simple way to understand like really complex concepts in a digestible way. So I really like the back and forth of the dialogue. So the one I want to talk about today is people always choose not to change. And so it starts with the philosopher talking to the youth, and explaining what Adlerian psychology, Adlerian. I know how to say this. I don't know why I'm struggling right now. And so in this type of psychological perspective, they're talking about personality and how personality and disposition, like somebody's personality and disposition, they would describe it in this type of psychology as lifestyle, like somebody's lifestyle. And so I thought that was really interesting because I don't think of personality and like somebody's disposition as their lifestyle. Like I see why. Like now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh, okay, so lifestyle could be, I can see why that can kind of coincide with somebody's personality, right? Because if you have a specific type of personality and way of going about things and way of believing, then you would kind of create the reality around you in a sense. And therefore it's like you kind of live in a lifestyle. You're in that lifestyle then. And so some of the lines that I have highlighted here is that lifestyle is the tendencies of thought and action in life. And I think on social media, we hear lifestyle a lot, like, like even when people like brand themselves, like influencers, content creators brand themselves, they're like, oh, like I make lifestyle content, right? So when I think of lifestyle content, I think of like, yeah, how you're living, right? But what's interesting here is like the addition of lifestyle is the tendencies of thought and action. So it's not just like how you're living your life, it's the thought process. And so I think that's interesting because your thought processes definitely do impact the action you take. I just never quite looked at it like that. So then he continues to break down what he means by lifestyle is the tendencies of thought and action in life. He says how one sees the world and how one sees oneself. Think of lifestyle as a concept bringing together these ways of finding meaning. In a narrow sense, lifestyle could be defined as someone's personality. Taken more broadly, it is a word that encompasses the worldview of that person and his or her outlook on life. And I really appreciate this breakdown of what lifestyle is, because I think that it really puts back into like the who's in control into the person's hands. So like for example, even just the title of this like passage, people always choose not to change. I know that sounds very harsh, but in saying that somebody's lifestyle is very much the same as their personality, it directly impacts their worldview and how they look at themselves and how they look at the world. And so you can like gather from that the way that you think about the world and the way that you look at the world will automatically impact your action and therefore kind of like create and manifest your reality. And I think this particular section is so important to me because I talk a lot about and thought a lot about like the victimhood mindset and what it means to be like, and I'm not talking about like actually like people who have been victimized, like yes, of course. But I'm talking more about this victim mindset. They think they call it like um interpersonal victimhood. It's like I think sociology is recognizing this as like almost like a personality trait where you really start to identify in this way and set yourself up to be powerless in change in your life. And I'm not talking about very severe, obvious like victim people who have been victimized, but I do appreciate this idea of, you know, describing one's lifestyle as part of their personality, because your lifestyle can be defined as someone's world, the way that they look at the world, and their outlook on life. That's going to directly impact thought. That's going to directly impact action, which will directly impact what's happening in that person's life. And so, let's see. So they go back and forth some more. Hello. Um, they go back and forth some more. And the youth is like a person's view of the, like questioning, like, so their view of the world. And the philosopher says, say there's someone who worries about himself and says, I am a pessimist. One could rephrase One could rephrase that to instead say, I have a pessimistic view of the world. You could consider that the issue is not personality, but rather the view of the world. It seems that the word personality is nuanced and suggests being unchangeable. But if we're talking about a view of the world, well, then that should be possible to alter. So it's interesting to even like consider like personality the same as lifestyle, which also impacts your worldview. Is it really, again, is taking this, like, I think what this particular section is really getting at is like these like identity politics and like getting wrapped up in one's identity, right? And so when I was talking about in like victimhood, people who kind of adapt to this victim mindset, it's like it becomes an identity, it becomes a personality trait. And people tend to feel very strongly about the way that they label themselves, which kind of surrenders themselves and makes them a little like unchangeable, like immalleable. And people tend to fall back on these things. But if we look at personality as somebody's like worldview, right? Like he's saying, I am a pessimist instead of I am a pessimist. You could rephrase it as I have a pessimistic view of the world. And the more you create that separation, the more you can allow for there to be change and like evolution and growth, instead of fully identifying with the word, like the descriptive nature. So it's kind of, I don't know, my mind is kind of blown away by this like conversation of separating the separation of identity through lifestyle, personality, and just talking about it in that way in worldviews. And so the youth says, this is kind of confusing. When you speak of a lifestyle, do you mean a way of living? And the philosopher says, yes, you could put it that way. To be a little more accurate, it is the way one's life should be. You probably think of disposition or personality as something with which you are endowed, without any connection to your will. Lifestyle is thought of as something that you choose for yourself. So I appreciate the idea that like when we talk about personality and these like identifying the ways we identify or characterize ourselves, we kind of talked about it as in a very fixed way, as if it like it cannot be changed and it was like put on us, right? Like, so if I say, for example, I'm a leader, right? Like I lead, this would, and getting really tied to that identity would kind of send this like implicit message to self that I cannot be weak. I cannot follow. I don't like following. I need to be able to lead the pack. I cannot have moments of taking a step back. Like these types of messages can be sent when we're kind of latched onto like these personality traits that aren't allowed to be molded in different ways and change. And so changing the word personality to lifestyle would mean that it is something you choose for yourself. So it gives you back this very active participation in your life, in that you're saying, Oh no, I actually choose for myself. So like today I can wake up and say, hey, I am um I feel like I can lead today. Like I want to take charge today. I want to take more action. And then or I can wake up the next day and say, hey, I can check in with myself. I do not have the energy today. I would like to take a back seat. I might need to have some support, right? Like instead of identifying with this like at the leader and just that is your full personality, we're more complex and dimensional. So lifestyle is something you can choose for yourself. And so the youth says that you choose for yourself. Question. Question mark. The philosopher says, yes, exactly. You choose your lifestyle. The youth says, so not only did I choose to be unhappy, but I even went so far as to choose this warped personality too. And the philosopher is like, absolutely. And the youth is like, ha, now you're really pushing it. When I became aware, I already had this personality. I certainly don't have any recollection of having chosen it, but it's the same for you, isn't it? Being able to choose one's own personality at will. Now, that sounds like you're talking about robots, not people. And so I hear, and again, remember, like the title of this section is People Always Choose Not to Change. And so the youth is like having a hard time accepting this piece that you do choose your personality, the way you handle things, the way you identify. These are all choices you make. And so he's like, there's no, what do you mean? Like, by the time I became aware, like more conscious, you know, as you get older, you become a little bit more aware, more conscious of your patterns, your behaviors. He's like, I've already had this personality once I became conscious. I don't remember choosing it. Like, when did I actively choose to be this way? And so he's like, no, that's not, people aren't like that. Like robots don't, that's for robots. Robots can choose to like be a certain way, not us. And the philosopher says, of course, you did not consciously choose this kind of self. Your first choice was probably unconscious, combined with external factors you have referred to. That is like race, nationality, culture, and home environment. These certainly had a significant influence on that choice. Nonetheless, it is you who chose this kind of self. So it's like this acknowledgement that, of course, in this society, there is going to, like, we have race, we have nationality, we have culture, our home environment. These are all things that absolutely play a role in our personality and who we become. However, and it has a significant influence on the choice you make, but you still make the choices. Like you still choose to show up certain ways. You still you have more power and control than you think you do. And but we're not going to like negate the fact that there are all these influences on you, but at the end of the day, you still choose to show up as this kind of self, right? So think about like people who experience similar types of trauma and handle it differently, right? Like we have what's post-traumatic growth, people who experience post-traumatic growth versus those who don't and just end up suffering from PTSD instead. And so it really, not that I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but I think it's so interesting to see the difference of the influence and what choices you do have. But of course, these are all like race, nationality, culture, home environment are all significant influences on the choices that we do make. But the youth responds, I don't get what you're saying. How on earth could I have chosen it? And the philosopher said, Adlerian psychology's view is that it happens around the age of 10, which is interesting. So there's a lot of developmental psychology that goes into this, which I'm not going to get into. That is, it's so funny because I'm studying psychology and this book is definitely psychology heavy, but also we don't need to get into that nitty gritty. I would like to take a break from the nitty gritty sometimes. And so the youth says, well, for argument's sake, and now I'm really going out on a limb, say that when I was 10, I unconsciously made this choice of lifestyle or whatever. would that even matter? You can call it personality or disposition or lifestyle, but regardless, I had already become this kind of self. The state of things doesn't change at all. And the philosopher says that is not true. If your lifestyle is not something that you were naturally born with, but something you chose yourself, then it must be possible to choose it over again. And the youth says, now you're saying I can choose it all over. And the philosopher says, maybe you haven't been aware of your lifestyle until now. And maybe you haven't been aware of the concept of lifestyle either. Of course, no one can choose his or her own birth. Being born in this country, in this era, and with these parents are things you did not choose, and all these things have a great deal of influence. You'll probably face disappointment and start looking at other people and feeling, I wish I'd been born in their circumstances. But you can't let it end there. The issue is not the past, but here in the present. And now you've learned about lifestyle. But what you do with it from here on is your responsibility. Whether you go on choosing the lifestyle you've had up until now, or you choose a new lifestyle altogether, it's entirely up to you. Then the youth says, then how do I choose again? You're telling me you choose that Then how do I choose again? You're telling me you choose that lifestyle yourself, so go ahead and select a new one instantly. But there's no way I can just change on the spot. And the philosopher says, yes, you can. People can change at any time, regardless of the environments that they are in. You are unable to change only because you are making the decision not to. What do you mean exactly? The youth says. The philosopher says people are constantly selecting their lifestyles. Right now, while we are having this tit for tat, we are selecting ours. You describe yourself as an unhappy person. You say that you want to change right this minute. You even claim that you want to be reborn as a different person. After all that, then why are you still unable to change? It is because you are making the persistent decision not to change your lifestyle. And the youth says, no, don't you see? That's completely illogical. I do want to change. That is my sincere wish. So how could I be making the decision not to? And the philosopher says, although there are some small inconveniences and limitations, you probably think that the lifestyle you have now is the most practical one, and that it's easier to leave things as they are. If you stay just like this, experience enables you to respond properly to events as they occur, while guessing the results of one's actions. You could say it's like driving your old familiar car. It might rattle a bit, but one can take that into account and maneuver easily. On the other hand, if one chooses a new lifestyle, no one can predict what might happen to the new self or have any idea how to deal with events as they arise. It will be hard to see ahead to the future and will be filled with anxiety. A more painful and unhappy life might lie ahead. Simply put, people have various complaints about things, but it's easier and more secure to be just the way one is. The youth says one wants to change, but changing is scary. The philosopher says, when we try to change our lifestyles, we put our great courage to the test. There is the anxiety generated by changing and the disappointment attendant to not changing. I am sure you have selected the latter. Wait, the youth says, wait. Just now you used the word courage. And the philosopher says, yes. Adlerian psychology is a psychology of courage. Your unhappiness cannot be blamed on your past or your environment. And it isn't that you lack competence, you just lack courage. One might say you are lacking in the courage to be happy. And that's the end of this section. And I'm gonna say, listen, this completely blew my mind. This whole conversation. And I think too, for me, it really hits home because I'm very much into, if you don't know me, I have a whole podcast called the Self-Indulgent Podcast, and I am studying clinical psychology. And it is all about this, like, understanding that the relationship to self is like probably the most important relationship because it's going to determine how you feel about life, how you move through life, right? So some of what we're talking about today, and how many videos do we see if you're in like the wellness space of like lifestyle and people labeling themselves as lifestyle influencers and all this stuff. And I just, it just really hit home, because I think in this space you see a lot of videos on how to change, how to be your best self, how to glow up, and I think so many of us really struggle to do different, to try new things, um to transform our lives, right? Like and it's not that the desire isn't there, but I really think it's important to think about the why. And I think this helped explain the why. It is easier to stay the same. It is easier to do things the way you've always done them, despite the desire to do something different, because it's safer. You know how you're going to respond to things. You know how the people around you presently are typically responding and acting, right? Like it becomes very predictable. And the brain is wired to prioritize and to stay in comfort. That is why they are calling today, like what's like this generation or this time in society, of like the comfort crisis. Like it is just, we have gotten, especially with these our devices and all of these other things, we have gotten very, very, very comfortable, and our brains are wired to avoid pain and seek pleasure. And so it's interesting that at the end of the day, even if it feels painful to stay the same, clearly not painful enough. It would be more painful to jump into the uncertainty and the unknown, right? And what's that quote? There's a quote that's like, um, what is the quote? It's like the pain, um, people change when the pain of feeling the same is worse, or something like that. And I think that kind of speaks to this, right? Like you're not some until you're at the point where it's like more painful it's more painful to stay the same than change. um that's when people make the decision. That's when people really, like, I think, shift their lives, when it's more painful to be the same person I am every day and I can't take it anymore. That is when people are like, I'm just going to take the plunge, because this is not it. This is really painful. And so I appreciate that. And it really kind of highlights how you build courage. And then we could talk about like trusting yourself and showing yourself that you can do different and building that muscle. Like at the end of the day, it really is a muscle that needs to be strengthened and worked on and trained. So, okay, I think that is all I have for today. I liked that section a lot. I thought it was really, really big. Again, the book is The Courage to Be Disliked. And that was like 3 pages. Like that was just such a small part of the book. And it's just, I have to take this in sittings, because I'm just like, wow, that's incredible. But yeah, thanks for listening, and I will do this again at some point. Good night.